Welcome to Better Mental Health, a podcast for men looking to build a resource and community around destigmatizing mental health. I'm Jamie.
I'm Blake.
And I'm Blair. Today we're diving into a topic that doesn't get nearly enough honest conversation: sex. We'll be exploring our experiences with sex in relationships and marriage, the role of sex therapy, the influence of porn, the nice guy phenomenon, which we've kind of touched on in a previous episode, and much more. The place that I wanted to start, one of us has actually been in sex therapy before, and I'm very curious to hear a little bit more about it. I've heard some things, but yeah, I want to dive a little bit deeper. So Jamie, you're who I'm talking about.
Yeah. I've been in sex therapy with my partner. So it's going to be a tricky one to navigate because I want to be respectful to Lauren, but yeah, try and share about it and talk about it. Cause I think that, I remember when we were initially talking about going to couples therapy in the first place, I remember feeling so defeated because like Lauren and I were having issues with sex, with our relationship in just terms of like communication. And I remember feeling so defeated because I thought that it meant that we were like broken or bad or like that we're, there was still the feeling of stigma around the idea of therapy.
I feel like that's not just necessarily for couples either. Like,
right.
We've talked about it a little bit before, but just there's a stigma with therapy, like, oh, something's broken or not right.
Yeah.
I have to fix it.
Yeah. I remember hearing also, like, there was one time before we ever even did therapy, hearing some gossip about another couple we knew that had gone to couples therapy. And I was like, ooh, they must be having issues. It's like I was bought into the stigma. It's like did I know that Lauren and I, a few years later, would be deep in the thick of it. And I just want to say, starting out, that all relationships could benefit from better communication, especially so on the level of sex. And I think that sex is a great place to even start because sex is the most vulnerable place where communication happens. And so getting a chance to do sex therapy we knew we needed it, but I don't think we knew how profoundly impactful it would be. So we found a therapist named Dr. Namita Kane. Shout out to her. We could put a link to her website in the description. She is incredible. She's in the Bay Area, but she works with couples, sort of ranging from we desperately need help with sex to like people who have a thriving sex life and make it more fun or adventurous. So she's got lots of great tips. You can check out her website.
Jamie, can you maybe clarify what you meant by or mean by having trouble with sex? That's a very wide topic. And how did you guys come to the conclusion of like, okay, something's wrong here?
Yeah, something being wrong was pretty obvious. Yeah, to start off with, our trouble revolved around me not initiating sex, which still is an issue, to be perfectly honest, in our marriage. Like, we still go through the same cycles of issues, but me not initiating sex, Lauren feeling frustrated with me. And also the major catalyst was me coming from our religious background, coming from the idea that porn and sexuality was not talked about. Those types of things were sort of taboo. I was hiding the fact that I was watching porn from Lauren. It was something that I was very comfortable talking to you guys about. We talked about this in my mental health journey, but Lauren didn't know that I was watching porn. And then eventually, thanks to a group therapy type space, it just came to light. Like, I was just like, I need to tell Lauren about this. I'm tired of being withholding and dishonest in our marriage. And so we talked about it, and it was really difficult for Lauren to hear, obviously, that I was having basically this like hidden aspect of sex and sexuality without her knowledge. And she felt super betrayed, I'm sure in a manner of sort of like, I feel cheated on. I don't want to speak for her entirely, and I'm sure she would say something similar, but that's for another episode. But essentially, we got to have lots of good conversations about it, and we started educating ourselves on like the impact of porn in relationships and talked it through, but we didn't actually go to therapy. And so we thought that maybe by talking about it would resolve. And at that point, I was like, oh, I'll stop watching porn. Now that I've revealed this to you, I'll stop watching porn. Of course, a few, I don't know what, months, whatever later, I was back to watching porn, and the whole sort of cycle came back up because it was something that I didn't want to stop. And so that's when we sort of were like, all right, something needs to change. We need to talk this through in a more professional setting. So that's when we sought out couples counseling. And then the timeline gets fuzzy, but eventually couples counseling wasn't quite the thing that was working for us. And so eventually we went to sex therapy.
I guess I'm curious about the way that you finally decided that you needed to reveal that you were watching porn to Lauren. And it was through, you said, a group setting. I'm just curious how that came to be and how that came to light and you made the final decision.
Yeah, I think that like there was just a constant feeling of shame around pornography and hiding it. And it was something that I dealt with in my personal life, like growing up with my parents. There was so much hidden from my parents that I, because I was trying to fit into the mold of Christian Science, I was doing so many things that they wouldn't have approved of around porn or drinking or drugs, whatever it was. And so I think that when it came to my marriage, it just was like, I'm an adult here. I get to make a choice. I get to do something about this rather than hold on to. And I think it became sort of unbearable to hold on to that shame. And so in the group that I was in, it was called Educare, and we were doing something called deep listening. And in one of those spaces, I opened up and shared about this with one of the individuals in that group. Once I shared that with that person, that then prompted me to be like, all right, it's time to share this with Lauren. Like, I just have to. I forget how it happened, but when it happened, it was incredibly helpful to get it off my chest, but incredibly painful at the same time. And Lauren had this opportunity to, really like, she could have done what she wanted in our marriage. She could have ended our marriage at that point, like, justification for a lot of different things. And one of the things she did was I forget exactly when it happened and how it happened, but I think it was maybe like a day or two later, like I think that she took some time. She came back and like gave me a hug and sort of like not necessarily forgave me, but gave me forgiveness energy. And it was, that was one of those big cries. One of the
love that.
There was a really, really big cry that I had, and it felt like a lot of that shame that I'd been holding on to for so many years. Yeah, that was just like, I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it, because it was just like so many years of holding on to this from childhood all the way through my marriage of like, I'm a bad person for doing this. And then she kind of,
well, that's what I wanted to get clarification on. So you felt shame around porn even before you and Lauren were together.
Yeah. Oh,
was that just because of, I mean, I know for me, like I would hide it from like my parents, but I don't know if I necessarily tied a lot of like shame to it. It was just something that was like, well, obviously I don't want my parents to know. There was probably a little shame there.
Yeah.
But was that a big part of it for you even from the beginning? Like even like in college when you could maybe do it away from your parents?
Yeah.
Like watch it
parents
away from your parents' home?
It was the Christian Science messaging that I was holding on to was that because I'm watching porn, there was one point where in Christian Science I learned that basically like if I'm drinking, that means that I'm in this intoxicated state and I'm accepting reality, I'm accepting the physical, and that takes me away from healing capacity and God capacity. And so I felt like anything that was taking me away from perfect alignment with God was bad, and that I was making a choice to do something that took me away from the capacity to heal. And not only that, I would experience things that were basically a version of sin and mortal mind that would start showing up, sort of like karmic energy. Like I would do something bad, like watch porn or drink or smoke weed, and then bad shit would happen to me. Like I thought that like I was in this like really intense cycle of that, and I held on to that for a lot of years.
I was curious about your porn consumption. Did it feel like it became more shameful when you were in relationship with another person?
Yeah, probably. Again, not to speak for Lauren, but part of this was like Lauren growing up in Christian Science and not being educated on any of this stuff, and sort of coming from a more prude culture. You don't have an understanding of what this is. So she would communicate about porn like, absolutely not. Like, I don't ever want you to do that. And so here I am watching porn secretly, hearing that from her. And I was like, all right, there's no way I'm ever going to tell her.
The porn we grew up on was also like, terrible. Like it was incredibly misogynistic, like terrible, awful things. And I don't know what the porn that you all watch, but like, I prefer like amateur, real feeling, connection, eroticism. Like,
Yeah.
So,
well, not to derail us, but because I think it's funny. Did you guys use LimeWire?
Yes.
To get...
Oh my God.
That was the place where porn was downloaded.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Waiting for
100%.
like 30 minutes for like a 10-second clip or something like that.
Right. Yeah, on your dial-up internet, you know. And I remember just like you just find whatever, because it's not like you could really, like, you could search a little bit, but like you really had no idea what you were about to watch sometimes. Like
Yeah, because
open
they
up
would
a
just put
file
like
and be
all
like,
of the,
whoa.
you know, yeah, all of the like buzzwords in the title of the thing that you were
Right.
downloading. So you're like, I could get like this thing or that thing.
Yeah.
You had no idea.
It was really the Wild West back then in terms of the internet.
It was. Yeah.
It was anything goes. Yeah, man. Well, where were we in terms of
yeah, I was going to bring us back to it. Yeah, I was going to say, so you guys decided to do couples therapy. When you were participating in the couples therapy, at what point were you all figuring out like, oh, it's more than couples therapy we need? It needs to be specifically sex therapy that we go to, where we're able to talk about the things that are really on our minds.
Yeah, so much to all of this, but I think that so like our sex life was struggling, and what I'm realizing now is it wasn't a result. I thought that our sex life was struggling as a result of me watching porn, and I think that Lauren and I both thought that, and our sex life was struggling actually now looking back on it as a result of our communication around sex, and what I wanted in sex wasn't happening. And so I think that was more the issue, because now Lauren has become okay, and we've communicated about the fact that I watch porn, and that's okay, and like she's not trying to get me to stop watching porn. That's not a non-issue, and I can make the choice to either watch or not watch. And the more that's become a non-issue, the less of a thing that's become in my life, actually, which has been really sort of revealing. But then, yeah, going back to when we started it, it was more about the fact that I wasn't initiating sex enough, and she wasn't feeling attractive in our marriage. And part of the reason I wasn't initiating was I wasn't able to communicate what I needed and what would have been good in sex for me. And for Lauren, she was getting frustrated with me. And another layer to this was that because she was frustrated that our sex life wasn't happening in the way that she wanted, she would sort of attack me at times and, you know, say like I was the problem for sex not happening. And then it added to this sort of like spiral of like, okay, well, I feel guilty that I'm not initiating, but I'm also not quite getting what I need out of it. So then we had to learn how to communicate what was needed, and I had to learn how to communicate what I needed. And so that was a big part of what sex therapy was.
I'll say the initiation aspect of sex for men in heteronormative relationships that I've talked to, it feels like there is like this difficulty in initiating sex, and it could be for the reason that you specified of like not knowing how to communicate what you want. But I remember having a conversation with someone in my past, and we had a long conversation about initiating sex. And at that point, I was with someone and our sex was great. And I felt that in our relationship. I remember feeling like sometimes I just don't feel like initiating. But it's like when I've pushed through that and done it anyways, because I know it's at the end of it, I'll never regret it. Or very rarely regret it, and then we'll be feeling connected at the end. So it's like anytime that I've felt that and I've pushed past that and done the initiation part of it anyways, like it's only been a good thing, only benefited everybody.
Yeah, 100%. It's the initiation part. The one thing I should add to my story surrounding all of this is that I have ADHD, and we've listened to a few podcasts about ADHD and initiation around sex. And if there is this feeling of that there's a task, that it's like something to do, a lot of people with ADHD really struggle to start and like initiate those tasks. And so when sex starts to feel like a chore or a task, it can become a struggle to initiate. So that's something that I know is a part of the mix for me in this issue. But I think that ultimately pushing through is sort of the way to go. You know, thanks to sex therapy, we've tried a lot of different things. And one of the things that works best for us is to schedule sex and to have it be like, oh, if we're having a date night, then we're going to have sex before it gets too late. Because if it gets too late for me, I'm like, too tired to wait, not going to happen. So
yeah,
kind of have to fit it in this way that's sort of unorganic, but actually makes it happen. So whatever works.
A coworker of mine has mentioned that they do the same thing. Him and his wife
schedule it
like a scheduled. And I wondered if does that build up the pressure a little bit?
Oh,
or
sure.
is it, I guess it depends on the person, but that's how I imagined it would be. Is like, oh, now I like, there's this extra pressure that's going to it has to happen this night. But I want to get your perspective on that since that works for you guys.
I'll add two things. One is it adds the pressure, but one of the things that we learned in sex therapy that really helped me is that sex doesn't have to always be one thing. It doesn't have to be penetrative and lead to orgasms for both people. Maybe instead of sex, it's like connection time. And so it's like we could just cuddle. We could the gamut. Sex doesn't have to be A to Z. So I think that alleviates some of that pressure. And so it's like, just know that there's some connection time. And often when you start connection time, then that leads to something that is fun. So it takes away some of that pressure.
Sure.
And then,
yeah,
I think for me, knowing that it's there helps me actually build a little bit of the anticipation, because it's like I'm putting my mind and energy towards like, oh, this is going to happen tonight, rather than this could or could not happen. And instead we're just going to like watch a show and be lazy, So put some more intentionality and energy into it.
That makes sense. Yeah.
What about you, Blair?
Yeah. We don't schedule sex. We've talked about it, and I think it makes all the sense in the world to do that. And yeah, I think if we got into, which we have before, where, I haven't been initiating and sex has been kind of, I mean, we don't go very long without having sex, and I'll just leave it there for now. But I'm trying to like ride that line of what I should be talking about.
Couple hours. Yeah.
I shared so much. I've shared so much. I'm very curious if Lauren's going to be cool with this episode.
But something that you talked about with regards to what happened in your sex therapy was like the communication about what you want or need. It's mind-boggling to me the more people that I come in connection with, be it going on dates or just people that are open to talking about sex. I've noticed that people are hesitant to ask for what they want for a plethora of reasons, whether it be I'm nervous that they will not find me attractive after that, or whatever the case may be, but
or
like,
ashamed of it, potentially ashamed of what their desires are.
Exactly. But I think it's what's wild to me is anytime I've said something along the lines of like, well, I want to know what you want so that I can give it to you, and then you get what you want, and then we're all happy. It's like, seems like not such a like fantastical idea. It's just like a very grounded, like, if you ask for what you want, you might get it.
For sure.
And I wonder if that's where porn maybe has had a bit of a detrimental effect, because I know for me, I was a little late to the game in terms of when I had sex for the first time.
There's no such thing, is there?
Yeah.
I guess that's.
I think you're pretty normal, man.
I guess it felt like I was a little late to the game because it was, stereotypically. So it was later in college for me. It was my first time, and there was a lot of pressure built up because of that. Because I was just like, oh no, I'm falling behind, and I'm not going to know what I'm doing, and then I'm going to feel like I'm too old, and then people are going to be like, wow, you don't know what you're doing. At least I had this thought that like, oh, you at a certain age, you just need to know what you're doing. And it's so not the case, because everybody wants things different. Like we were just talking about, everybody has preferences, but I think porn might skew. That's like how you're learning about sex for many of us.
Yeah,
that's you're watching it, you're consuming it, you're like, oh, I guess this is how it works.
Yeah,
and most of the time that's not the case. And so I think sometimes those. Obviously, the first time can always be awkward for a number of reasons, but if you're not willing to have the conversation, or you're not comfortable to have the conversation, hey, what do you like? Then you're just going to be kind of grasping at straws, not knowing what you're doing, and then of course it leads to an unsatisfactory experience for both parties.
Yeah,
sure.
What's wild to me, like my dating experience from many moons ago of like the monogamy realm to the non-monogamy realm, like I feel like I'm not sure if it's specifically my own experience, but it's also I've shared from what I've talked to others about. But like the openness of what you are seeking in non-monogamy helps everybody get what they want, like so much more. And what I'm equating it to is like when I am now talking to someone new, I'm consistently like, this is the space that I have. This is the time and energy that I can provide. These are the things I'm interested in. And like all of that happens in a conversation. And my preference is always before meeting in person. And so I just feel like there's such a benefit of getting to what you want and what you actually need, like so early in the conversation. Because if those things don't align, like what are we even doing? Like we're going to come into conflict at some point because our things just don't align.
For sure.
So that's just a fascinating little tidbit.
Yeah, you're getting a master class on communication through the choice of polyamory, it sounds like. Do you feel like that's helped in like non-sexual ways as well? Like, are you
I think
able
so,
to use that in other places?
Outside of dating or sexual?
No, just outside of dating, yeah.
Yeah, like it's been kind of tangential or parallel learnings of like what do I want in a relationship, and also like what do I want in life, and like those types of things kind of once you can start speaking to what you need or want in sex. For me, it's become easier to point at like things I want in life and need in life a little bit easier as well. So
yeah,
they're pretty tangential.
Blake, going back to your point about porn, I do agree that I think that porn has set up this unrealistic expectation for what sex was, and it built up the hype around sex in a way that was super energized and sort of like going through puberty. I think you're energized around it in general, but I think that as you get into relationships for longer and longer, that's another part of the challenge. And so I think going to sex therapy helps also just change the game up a little bit. You know, if you're able to start communicating about what you need, the mundanity of day-to-day life, and you've been with the same partner for a long time, you get to try something new and see what's exciting and different. So Lauren and I were able to explore a lot of new things thanks to sex therapy, and it made us both really just have a lot more fun with sex, which was awesome.
Yeah. And isn't it amazing sometimes, like just having that conversation, like, hey, here's what I like. Yeah. Like how many times does that person you're talking to be like, oh, okay, I could do that. Like, a lot of times we build this stuff up. A lot of times we build this stuff up to be so much worse in our minds. And then when you get it out in the open and you're just upfront with what it is that you like and what you need from that person, a lot of times if they're not just straight up saying, oh yeah, I could do that, then it at least leads to the conversation where you can get it out in the end. Because as we've talked about on previous episodes, daylight, best exposure. So getting things out, and if something's digging at you, eating at you, something that you need, and you just continue to carry that internally, I mean, that's what leads to issues later on. And oftentimes they become much worse if we let them sit.
Yep.
Yeah. For sure. I think you're going to have like that desire for whatever it is that you're interested in, whether or not you bring it out into the open with a partner. So it's like, if it's just going to brew underneath for your entire relationship and cause maybe strife, because underneath you're going to be like, well, I'm not getting everything I need. Maybe not, this might not be like a fully conscious thought, but if you're not getting what you need, it's going to create conflict in your relationship. So
yeah, I want to add to that, which is I think that can ultimately fester into a lot of the like really, really bad behaviors, which is cheating or abuse or sexual abuse. A lot of these desires that are uncommunicated start to become bigger issues, and then they boil over into, Blair, I bet you could talk to this more specifically, but understanding the world of kink better than us. But a lot of people have these kinky desires that they don't know how to reconcile with, and that could lead to like sexually abusive behavior that turns them on. But if they were able to do that in a way that was healthy and communicated, that might change what their sex life looks like, and they're able to actually have a healthier sex life that isn't that way. I don't know if you can add to that, Blair, but
yeah, I think what was coming to mind while you were just describing that was like, I feel like there's an understanding of kink that is inaccurate. I think, when people hear of like a dominant and a sub, or a dom sub relationship, they're like, oh, the dominant is in control and is leading the entire situation or the entire, scenario or scene. But the truth is, like, the sub, through all the very intricate conversations, the sub is always in control. The safe word has been discussed. It is always what they want and what makes them feel good. And doms can push that and try and, find where new things that might excite, all again through conversation with a sub. But in the end, like, the sub is in control. And I think
that's cool.
There's some aspect of that I think is important to reiterate. But yeah, I think you're right though. Like, I think something that's coming to mind also is, like, the more that I'm going through my program, and reading or coming up with real vignettes of clients presented by instructors, 98% of any woman that is brought up in a vignette is like, oh, there's a sexual trauma history. So
yeah.
We gotta do something about this. Like, this is, I think this is great that we're talking about it, but it's like, it's actually getting, like, I don't think any of us has probably gone through our life without, like, traumatizing a woman in some degree. So it's like, we just gotta start having the conversations about it, because I think there's some really awful behavior out there.
Yeah. I do wonder if it's a lack of education or I don't know, maybe porn is a factor as well, where it's just like, oh, this is what I've seen. This is what's been imprinted into my brain for hours and hours of watching this stuff, and so
this is what that paid actress,
I think it's what's normal,
liked.
Then that stuff comes out. And I think just because sex is one of those innuendo topics that doesn't get discussed, as we were just talking about, it's one of those things that festers. It lives under the radar for a long time until it gets to a breaking point for some men where they do something terrible and stupid because they lost control and they had something simmering under the surface for years and years.
Yeah.
And they just didn't know how to bring it up in a healthy way before it got to be a problem. So I agree. I think it's really important that we're talking about this.
For sure. Yeah, that's a crazy statistic, Blair, that you brought up. I wonder what we can do other than, like, when we see toxic behavior in our community, calling it out and addressing it, but talking about it on the podcast and making sure that if you are a man who is holding on to and feeling ashamed of certain parts of yourself, or feeling like you're a bad person for something you enjoy, or I don't know what it is, I think that those are the circumstances where it really would be healthy and helpful to talk to a professional about it and figure out how to reason with that desire in a way that's healthy, because I think that that's the thing that's going to start changing the way that women are treated, is through being seen and understood for who you are, and figuring out how to manifest these desires in a way that's healthy. And I don't know. So there's we got to figure out how to change the game for women, because it's not okay that men are abusing them.
And there's this kind of segues, I think, a little bit into something like the incel culture a little bit too, which, for those who don't know, incel culture, incel stands for involuntary celibate, and it usually pertains to, like, a group of guys who are not having sex and not by choice, and oftentimes they just blame women for it. They blame women for the fact that they are not having sex, because in their mind, it could be a number of reasons, but if they're not the top 1% of guys, then they think that any modern woman today just won't accept them. And it turns into a victim blaming cycle, where they're not the problem, it's the women that are the problem. And it's this deeply misogynistic viewpoint that, unfortunately, I think a lot more people have than we might realize. And it's the internet today has created, you can really become a part of any type of group. So even a group like this, you can find a community around. And when you find a community who is reinforcing everything that you've been telling yourself, and then making that messaging even worse and leading you down different rabbit holes of misogyny, and that can continue to fester over months and years. And once you go down that path, I imagine it's hard to come back out of.
I wonder,
because like we were talking about on our loneliness episode, if you found a community, it might not be a healthy community, but it's people who you resonate with and connect with, and we become very influenced by those who we connect with, those who are in our circle, in our community.
Yeah. We don't have a lot of listeners on this podcast yet, but I imagine that the chances of someone like that being a listener to this podcast and someone who's in that type of community is going to be few and far between. But I do hope that we capture just small percentage of those people, and it'd be fascinating to me if you are someone like that, if you could share with us or would want to come on the podcast, because we'd want to just have a conversation with somebody like that and see what they're all about. It'd be
that'd be a fascinating episode.
Yeah.
To get back to the kink thing, there was something that I found I wanted to share, that it was just a text or a screenshot of something that was on somebody's Field profile. Field, Feeld, is an app that is mostly for non-monogamous people, but I would say it's just for the curious, because there are monogamous people on there who are like, I'm monogamous, but I found this app because people are open and honest and about what they want. But anyways, on one of the profiles that I found, I don't know if I connected with this person, doesn't matter. But I found the last picture on their profile was a screenshot of text, and it says, here's the thing that some people don't seem to understand about sex and kink. You have to respect boundaries before you get to push them. You have to show people they're safe before you can make them feel scared. You have to respect them before you get to degrade them. You have to be normal with people before you can get to be dirty with them. You can't be skipping steps. Treating them like a person always comes before treating them like a toy.
Yeah.
And it's like that's the thing that I think in is the other aspect of BDSM and kink. It's like, what are you looking to feel afterwards? And that was from actually a metamor. Metamor is someone whom is dating the same person as you are. Yeah, a metamor actually brought that to our attention and was like asking, like, all right, so what are the things you guys want to feel afterwards? Do you want to feel empowered? Do you want to feel degraded or humiliated? So that's what the kink exploration is really good. But I thought that was so poignant, because it's like, you have to approach people as human beings and like just be respectful and empathetic to someone who's living a life, living through this human experience.
It's just like, it comes down to like this should be a basic concept for all of us. It's like, treat other people as if they're human beings, because they are.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter what walk of life they came from, if they have a different background, different perspective. Like, we're all human beings doing life for the first time and trying to figure things out. So let's treat each other like human beings. And then it comes down to, after that, communication. In the case of kink, like, we can push some of these boundaries. We can go down these other avenues, but the first step is, let's connect as human beings.
Yes, sure. Exactly. For sure. Yeah.
Going back to the conversation around sex therapy, one thing I want to finish off by saying, there's a series on Netflix called Sex, Love, and Goop, and it's a really good introduction to the world of opening up these conversations around sex and sex therapy. So if you're not comfortable going to a sex therapist or talking about that right away, take a look at that show, and that's a good way to get started and start having these conversations with your partner and just sort of see what this is all about. And it really opens up, I think, a big world for a lot of people. So we were going through sex therapy right when this show came out, and we were watching it at the same time. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. This feels exactly like what we're talking about and doing. So
nice.
Yeah, I recommend that. But in terms of...
Well, I haven't seen that show.
Yeah, there's another show that Blair had us watch in preparation for this episode, which Blake, did you watch?
It's
did
not
you watch
as...
an episode of this?
No, I did. I told you I didn't do my homework this week.
Okay.
Well, yeah, so I didn't watch the Netflix show, but there was a show that my partner and I happened upon called Sex Box. The concept is so dated and so ridiculous. The show itself is dated. I think it aired in like 2015, but it feels like it was recorded in like 2000, early mid 2000s. So it's very like corny. Are you ready to enter the sex box? The whole concept is very ridiculous.
Over dramatic in terms of what it does.
Way too dramatized. But like the reason I enjoyed it was because it was very upfront with the talk of, couples are coming in. Yeah, I'll just give the premise. Couples come in one at a time with three professionals, quote unquote, And then what happens is they talk about their problems with their sex life, and the professionals ask them I think there's a sexologist, a psychotherapist, and like a pastor who has some problematic things that they say. But they talk to the couple and find out what the issue is, and the three professionals make a determination whether or not they should be invited into this, basically like a shipping container on stage in front of this live audience, soundproof box, and they would go have sex. They would come back out, get mic'd up, and then sit back down, and they would talk about the experience. The main sexologist is every episode, so it gets a little repetitive, says like, so we wish we could be in the bedroom with you, but we can't, so this is as close as we can get, because afterwards you're flooded with oxytocin, serotonin, and you're just your most honest and open. That's the whole premise of this, is like they want to talk to people about their sex issues, see if they're able to maybe follow some of those in the sex box, come back out and talk about it. But I thought it was super interesting, because I think you had mentioned it earlier, Jamie, but like sex is usually one aspect of the relationship that is just showing you that other things aren't working potentially. So this show showed a lot of that, where it was like, sex wasn't working for them, but maybe there were all these other things that they hadn't even discussed or talked about. Again, communication.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't necessarily say I recommend the show, but it is a fun,
it's an interesting
fun show that, to sit down and joke about.
Yeah. I think it's a cool idea. The execution, maybe not the best. Like if they were to do that,
Agreed.
like rather than doing, I don't know, what is it, 3 couples per episode or something like that, do a whole hour on one couple and have much longer conversations and get more in depth, have one therapist instead of 3 fighting for conversation, that type of thing. I feel like that would lead to a much better version of Sexbox than you do like Sexbox 2.0 or maybe
new podcast idea.
Yeah, maybe we have a future podcast. That'd be really interesting. I think we need to be certified therapists before that happens.
Yeah. But one of the things that came up in the show too, they have like a kind of a ground correspondent or a street correspondent who goes out on like the streets and asks different things. And some of those things I wanted to bring to our conversation on this. One of the things that the couple was dealing with in their sex was a woman was like, there was no foreplay whatsoever. He just like dives right in. And the guy was like, yeah, like how much time does a woman actually need, or how much time does foreplay? And then all the men in the street interviews were like, oh yeah, foreplay is just like a chore. So I wanted to ask you guys, well, I guess how long is like a good amount of foreplay for you all? Or maybe so it's not specific to any one of our relationships. If I were to say that what all the experts said was women need around 30 to 40 minutes of foreplay to get into the right mood and setting. Like, does that seem outlandish? Does that surprising? I guess I'm just curious about your guys' reactions to that.
If I had to think that it was 30 to 40 minutes every time we connected, that would be an intimidating prospect. But I do think that makes sense to me, given like our relationship. And one of the things that Lauren and I have come to the realization of through communication is that foreplay isn't just in the bedroom. Like if foreplay is
huge,
the little interactions throughout the day. Think of scheduling sex. Since we have sex scheduled, it's like, oh, let's think about how we're interacting today. And like for Lauren, a big part of love languages is getting gifts. Can I get Lauren a little gift here or there? I say these things like I'm really good at it. I'm actually horrible, and this is a thing that needs a lot of work. But yeah, learning and knowing that needs to happen is super crucial. And so like Lauren has communicated, that helps her a lot in terms of foreplay and getting excited. She then starts to anticipate more if there's a date night and she gets dressed up, like getting in a sexy outfit, whatever it is, like that's all part of the deal. So it totally
that's a really good thing. That was some of the things that I think the people that were interviewed on the street started to say. Like, it's not just about whatever the foreplay might be directly before sex. Like, are you touching throughout the day? Are you, if that's a big one for my partner and I, it's like just literally just like as someone's washing the dishes or something, just rubbing their back, massaging their neck. Physical touch is like huge for our relationship. So I completely agree. It's like, it's not strictly the bedroom. I made a joke when we were watching it, when the whole conversation was happening about this. I was like, all right, the clock started, right? Because I'm like massaging your feet as we're watching this show. Like we're 40 minutes in, so joking, but
That's a good way to reset the counter. Start back at 0 again.
Yeah, exactly.
That question.
Yeah.
Killed that mood.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, thinking about it more that way, I mean, that makes sense. Because I had the same thought as Jamie, like 30 to 40 minutes seems, when there's other factors at play, I don't think it necessarily is the case. And of course, it depends on the person. And again, that is why communication is so important. Like Jamie, like you said, knowing that, like, and how much that matters can have a huge impact. Because I could totally see why it would be super unsatisfactory most of the time if it's like, oh, my husband or boyfriend just wants to just, he's ready to go and he's done in 5 minutes and then that's it. Then it would be like, okay, this sucks. So figuring out what it is that the other person needs is, it has been the theme of this episode.
I was going to say, very much so. Communicate.
Yeah.
I know that a big portion of my reticence to initiate was due to this standard that I set for foreplay pretty much from early on in relationships. I'm very attentive in that regard, and it's hard to keep that up to some degree. And I think what you mentioned earlier, Jamie, about like some sex or initiating sex becoming like a chore,
right?
When you hear 30 to 40 minutes of just foreplay, that kind of sounds like a chore. But like I think there are ways to make it less that, again, through communication.
Yeah, through communication and creativity and trying new things, having fun with it, learning about the different ways to make foreplay happen. Like, it doesn't have to be one thing. So,
and it changes over time too, right? Like, the way that you might do things early on in a relationship might not be the same way. It might not work in the same way that you need it done 10 years into the relationship. So things change, and that's why I think it's important to keep communicating over time. It's great if you can kind of figure out what each other needs at first, so that works for a while, but sometimes things evolve and change. And if we get stuck in the same patterns, as is easy to do, and we're kind of ritual-based animals, it's really easy to forget that, like, oh yeah, this is a constant thing. And it's a good reminder for me that it's not something where you can just set it and forget it, but like making sure that you and your partner or partners are constantly communicating about what's working and not working.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's one last thing. I mean, we can probably keep going on this for hours and hours, but there's one, I guess I shouldn't say last thing, but one other topic I wanted to get into, which I think is a common problem. Blair, you sent something along these lines to our group chat, actually, about how men often have an orgasm. Women...
The orgasm gap, essentially.
Yeah, the orgasm gap, exactly. Women aren't experiencing orgasms nearly enough. They should be experiencing orgasms just as much as us. And so I think a lot of men in a lot of relationships, because all this stuff isn't talked about, men are just like going for penetration. They have an orgasm and they think that their partner is satisfied. But if they're not talking about it, oftentimes the woman is not satisfied, hasn't had an orgasm. And there's a book out there called She Comes First. And like, there's all these different ways to communicate and talk about it. But I think that we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't mention that men need to be doing a lot more in terms of pleasuring their partners.
I think it all comes, not all, about a huge portion of that comes to education around it. Like, I don't think I was ever told that, like, I don't know the statistic offhand, but I think it's like less than 10% of women orgasm from penetrative sex.
Yeah.
So it's like the fact that that's like seen as the ultimate goal, obviously for men with a sexual relationship, it's like, that's just not the right way to look at it. Because the goal should be like everybody gets what they want and gets pleasure. But that was I didn't read through the statistics of that specific study, but I knew there was an orgasm gap. I mean, I've talked about this with partners in the past. My own personal relationships, I like to keep more than one-to-one if it's possible. But I
always feel bad, like if I get to, but I feel bad about myself. I'm like, oh, that wasn't enjoyable for you, so I feel bad.
Yeah.
And so like for me, it's like, I don't know, it's interesting how some guys might have the perspective of like, well, I got off, so I'm good.
Well, I think that I don't know that guys are conscious of it, because I think that they think that based on their education of sex, they think that penetration feels good for women and that they're orgasming during the same, like, I think a lot of men just don't know that like, that's not feeling good, or that's not pleasurable enough for a woman to orgasm. Or there's some men who are just selfish, I guess, and just like are lazy. I don't know.
Well, I think it's like
I'm sure
the other thing that maybe as a detriment of porn is like when a guy finishes, then it's over. And it's like, but that's just like, that can just be the start, honestly. Like, you still got other things you can do, like a billion different things you can do. So it's just for men. I know that, you know, once you finish, like, there's like I don't know the specific, you know, hormones and everything that drop and you're into like a satisfied space, but like, you gotta still consider your partner and make sure that they get to that similar place or same place.
Actually, because I mean, honestly, I feel like it just makes the experience so much better when both parties are able to fully enjoy it and get the most satisfaction out of it. I think even thinking about it selfishly, like, that just feels better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, one other question I had just for us to talk about really as a last thing is, what do we think the impact of porn is, and what's a good relationship with it? Can we define that, or is that's kind of a difficult thing to do? But Blair, you kind of mentioned it earlier that one of the things you like to watch is amateurs, like real couples and more romantic. I think that's a good example of something that might be a little healthier, more realistic in terms of what to watch. Is there anything else you could share about porn that could be helpful?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that's difficult. I don't know how much to divulge, but my relationship with porn has changed over the years, you know, from, again, I had a similar upbringing and very shameful feeling towards it for a very long time, to in past relationships and previous partnerships, it's like became something that we ended up doing together, which in that realm felt like such a connecting thing. Yeah, I think also to get to the communication in the non-monogamous world that I've talked about a little bit is like, the other thing that not only will I talk about like, oh, what are you interested in trying? Sometimes I'll be like, are you open to, would it feel good for you to send like a link of something that you really are interested in trying with me? So that way I know exactly what thing that they are interested in doing and the pleasure that they're trying to seek from a specific act. So I think I think porn is just like any substance, or maybe not substance, but just like anything. It's like in moderation and in moderation and with like the correct intent and take away the shame and the difficult feelings that come from that.
Yeah. I think from varies from person to person, the level of relationship with it. Like, if you're someone who kind of like drugs, like if you try a drug and you then get sucked into that world and abuse it, it might be something that you actually need to abstain from. Or if you're somebody who can access it in moderation in a healthy way, then know yourself and what your balance is.
I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. You guys already hit it on the head. All things in moderation. I mean, there was a period in my time where I would say I probably did have like a small medium addiction to it. Yeah. And
me too.
It wasn't even a conscious effort of mine to like move away from that. Maybe it's just as I got into like a healthy relationship where porn was always something that obviously I would hide it from my parents. I don't remember like the feeling of a ton of shame around it, which is weird because I would have been embarrassed if my parents had found anything I was looking at.
Right.
But I didn't necessarily quantify that as shame. That's just not something they should see me doing. But I didn't necessarily feel bad about looking at it, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a good thing, probably.
Yeah, that's great.
And so maybe I went into it with, maybe that was a little bit more of a healthier mindset. But then I think really what helped me was, just getting into a healthy relationship where porn was not something that was a issue for one party or both parties. It was something that could be kind of talked about openly. I do still find myself having that just instinct from my adolescent self of like, I'm supposed to hide this. Like, this is a personal thing for me to watch and nobody else. And so kind of opening up that door took me a little bit of time. But again, I don't think it's an inherently bad thing on its face.
When you're talking about opening up and sharing, you're not talking about necessarily watching it together, but more talking about the fact that you watch it. Oh, okay. I was curious about that.
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Gotcha. The other, like, the thing that I think we should also leave people with is like, I feel like a lot of our episodes are wanting to focus on like, what are you feeling, and trying to speak to that. And if you are watching porn and it feels like what we've described in the past, like shameful, or like, ooh, I feel like I'm doing this too much, or it feels like, talk to somebody about that. Find a therapist, find a friend whom you like are trust with that information. Just be like, I am feeling that it's becoming a problem or it's an issue. It's a good practice.
Yeah.
Get in touch with your feelings.
1000%. I think it's a good place to leave it off. It's great. This has obviously been a very vulnerable, open topic, so I hope listeners respect our privacy around what's been shared. And if you do have more questions, we'd love to know what questions you have, if this has sparked anything. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to us gab about sex.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks all. Love you guys.
All right. Love you guys.
Love you guys.